You send a message. No reply. You walk past someone you know and they look right through you. Within seconds, something in your chest tightens and it doesn't feel like a small thing. It feels like an injury. That reaction isn't an overreaction. It's ancient machinery doing exactly what it was built to do, and once you understand where it came from, you'll never quite experience being ignored the same way again. Let's start with the experiment that first pulled this feeling out of the shadows and into a laboratory setting where researchers could actually study it. Psychologist Kipling Williams spent decades studying this exact feeling through an experiment called cyberball. Participants play a simple ball-tossing game online with what they believe are two other real players. For a while, everything feels ordinary. The ball goes back and forth, everyone's included. Nothing unusual is happening. Then, partway through, the other players simply stop throwing the ball to them. No insult, no explanation, no dramatic confrontation, just quiet exclusion. The results were strikingly consistent, replicated across dozens of studies and thousands of participants. People reported genuine emotional pain even when they knew, going in, that the other players weren't real, that there was no actual social stakes involved, and that the entire game meant absolutely nothing in the real world. Knowing intellectually that it was meaningless didn't stop the sting. The distress showed up anyway, almost as if the rational, thinking part of the brain had no veto power over the reaction at all. That finding pointed towards something deeper than simple social awkwardness or hurt feelings. It suggested the pain of exclusion might be running through machinery your conscious mind doesn't fully control. Neuroscientist Naomi Eisenberger followed up with brain imaging studies during a version of this exclusion experiment, watching participants' brains in real time as the exclusion happened. She found that social rejection activates the anterior cingulate cortex, a brain region also heavily involved in processing physical pain. Being ignored doesn't just feel bad in some vague, metaphorical, poetic sense. Your brain appears to process it using overlapping circuitry to the pain of an actual physical injury. The phrase hurt feelings might be far more literal than most people ever assume. So here's the real question worth sitting with. Why would evolution wire something as abstract as social exclusion to hurt like a physical wound? What possible survival advantage comes from feeling pain over something as intangible as a missed reply or an unreturned glance? The answer becomes obvious once you stop thinking about exclusion in modern terms and start thinking about it in the terms your ancestors actually lived in. Because for most of human history, exclusion basically was a wound, just a slower, quieter one. Early humans survived in small, tightly interdependent bands, typically somewhere between 20 and 150 individuals. There was no surviving alone out there for long, not in any meaningful sense. No solo hunting parties bringing down large game single-handedly. No individual defense against predators prowling at the edges of camp, or against rival groups competing for the same limited resources. Your safety, your access to food, your ability to raise children all the way to adulthood, all of it depended entirely on staying inside a group that was willing to keep you. Being ignored, excluded, or cast out of that group wasn't a minor social slight in that world. It functioned as a preview of a very real, very possible death sentence. Not immediately, maybe, but exclusion meant reduced access to shared food, reduced protection, reduced help raising offspring, and a much higher chance that something eventually killed you that the group, together, could have prevented. A body that could accurately detect the earliest, faintest signs of social rejection and respond to them with real urgency had a serious survival advantage over a body that shrugged exclusion off as unimportant. Natural selection doesn't need you to consciously understand why something matters. It just needs your body to react as though it does. That's likely why the pain signal evolved to feel so immediate, so visceral, so hard to reason your way out of. A slow-burning, quiet worry wouldn't have been enough to guarantee a response. Evolution needed something sharp enough to grab your full attention and force immediate action, the same way physical pain forces your hand back from something hot before you've even consciously registered the decision to move. Researchers who study ostracism, including Williams himself across a long career of follow-up work, have found a remarkably consistent pattern in how people respond to being ignored, one that plays out in a fairly predictable sequence. First comes the pain, almost involuntarily, even when the exclusion is trivial, meaningless, or coming from strangers in a fake online game. This part isn't optional. It happens whether you want it to or not. Then comes something more interesting, an attempt to reconnect. People who have been ostracized often become more attentive to social cues immediately afterward. more eager to conform to group norms, more willing to comply with requests, even from the very group that just excluded them, in what looks like an unconscious effort to get back inside the circle. It's almost as though the mind's first instinct, after being pushed out, is to find the fastest possible way back in rather than to walk away entirely. Only after repeated or prolonged exclusion does that pattern typically flip, shifting into withdrawal, anger, resentment, or eventually giving up on the group altogether. But the first response, almost universally across the research, is the urge to reconnect, not the urge to retaliate or disappear. And that ordering makes a great deal of evolutionary sense once you think it through. A body that immediately gave up on the group at the very first sign of trouble, the first missed invitation or unanswered call, would have cut itself off from its only real chance of long-term survival. Persistence toward reconnection, at least initially, would have been the far safer evolutionary bet. This single mechanism explains a surprising amount about modern life that might otherwise feel oddly disproportionate, oddly intense for how small the triggering event actually is. Why an unanswered text can quietly gnaw at you for hours, replaying in the back of your mind even while you're trying to focus on something else entirely. Why being left out of a group conversation, even a completely trivial one about weekend plans you weren't especially interested in anyway, can sting far more than it seems like it logically should, given how little is actually at stake. Why watching three dots appear and then disappear without a message ever arriving can feel almost personally wounding, disproportionate to the actual content of what's being discussed. None of that is irrational, even though it often feels that way in the moment, even though you might privately criticize yourself for caring so much about something so small. It's a threat detection system built specifically for small, tightly bonded tribal groups where every relationship carried real survival weight, now firing off constantly and indiscriminately in a world of sprawling group chats, social media feeds, and hundreds of loose, low-stakes digital connections it was never designed to track or evaluate. Your ancestors needed that alarm system to survive. It kept them oriented toward the group, motivated to repair small ruptures before they became fatal ones, alert to the earliest signs that their place in the tribe might be slipping. You inherited the exact same wiring, virtually unchanged, just pointed now at a world that looks nothing like the one it evolved for. A world where you can be simultaneously connected to hundreds of people and still feel a sharp, physical sting over one unanswered message from someone you barely know. There's an interesting asymmetry worth noticing here too. The system seems tuned for extreme sensitivity and very little tolerance for ambiguity. Silence gets interpreted as rejection far more often than it should be, statistically speaking. Someone might not reply because they're busy, because their phone died, because they simply forgot, for 100 mundane reasons that have nothing to do with how they feel about you. But the ancient alarm doesn't wait around for the most statistically likely explanation. It fires first and asks questions later because in the environment it evolved in, a slow, careful analysis of intent could have cost you your place in the only group capable of keeping you alive. So the next time you're ignored, even briefly, even by someone whose opinion of you shouldn't logically matter that much, and it stings far more than it seems like it should, you're not being oversensitive, and you're not malfunctioning. You're feeling one of the oldest, most functional alarms your species ever built, an alarm that once meant the difference between staying safely inside the group and being left dangerously alone outside it, still firing exactly the way it was designed to, in a world it was never built to understand.